welcome Alexander with open arms. Under his rule, Egypt's religious and cultural practices are still allowed. In return, the Egyptian priests give Alexander the title of Pharaoh. It marks a profound turning point. For it is here that Alexander began to believe he was truly a living god. In 331 BC, Alexander sets off on an epic journey to visit the oracle at Siwa. He is seeking proof of his divine existence.
It was about 300 miles. The approach to Siwa would have been on a plateau, relatively flat land, but sand dunes all around. The oracle was a well-known destination. There would have been a path, but the path could easily become obscured. You would have a situation where you would have searing heat during the day, incredible cold at night. A sandstorm could come up very quickly where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face.
Alexander and his men do become lost after a terrible sandstorm. But legend has it that two birds saved them by guiding the group to their destination, the extraordinary oasis of Siwa and the temple of Zeus Ammon.
Well, that visit to the oracle, this is one of the most fascinating episodes really in the whole history of the ancient world. I think the question is, had Alexander in some way already masterminded a bit of a publicity exercise that he was the son of Zeus?
Alexander enters the temple alone while his men wait outside.
Here we have Alexander. He's a young man in his early 20s. He's already accomplished incredible things. And he's in a place where suddenly he's being treated, at least by the native Egyptians, as a god on earth. And you have to ask yourself, what is he thinking? I mean, he's certainly a long way from Macedonia at this point.
Alexander came out of the temple. They all rushed forward and said, "Alexander, Alexander, what did you ask?" And he said, "I'm not saying that." He said, "But we heard him call you the son of Zeus." He said, "All right, you can go with that story if you want." And it became then publicized by his publicist, and Alexander was allowed this version of his identity to spread because it, I think, picked up with previous suspicions on his part, possibly beginning from the stories of his mother, that he was somehow more than human.
From then on, Alexander's loyal scribe Callisthenes would call his master a god on earth. And the Egyptians would reaffirm that notion, depicting his image on some of the most sacred temple walls. At Luxor, Alexander is shown with raised hands, worshipping his divine father, the god Ammon.
Being a deity, he was immune from criticism. He was on a different plane, a different plateau, and far superior.
But being a pharaoh, a living god, is not enough for Alexander. He is determined to defeat his archenemy Darius once and for all. While Alexander has been in Egypt, Darius has been amassing another army to take him on. In October 331 BC, one of the most decisive battles in history is fought in the heat and dust of Gaugamela, Persia, north of modern-day Baghdad. This time, Alexander is outnumbered more than 3 to 1. But he thrives on danger, and the challenge only seems to embolden him more. His men are almost completely surrounded by the Persian army, but his flanks hold the enemy long enough to see a gap open in the Persian lines. Alexander seizes the moment and breaks through to attack Darius. The Persian king flees once again. One of the secrets of Alexander's success on the battlefield is his use of the phalanx, a 16-deep formation of soldiers carrying long spears.
Alexander used a hammer and anvil technique with his phalanxes. His own phalanx, his Macedonian infantry, would form the anvil. And against the anvil, he would crush the enemy phalanx using the hammer, which is his companion cavalry. So the hammer and anvil was really a technique that he used time and again to be successful in battle.
Darius, who has fled east into the mountains, is eventually murdered by one of his officers. 3 years after landing at Troy, Alexander is proclaimed Lord of Asia. He'd accomplished what his father planned to do but could not. While other great leaders would have been content with this monumental triumph, Alexander isn't. There is no turning back. In 329 BC, Alexander pushes on toward Afghanistan to conquer the eastern edge of the Persian Empire. Now he faces an even greater challenge, the forbidding mountains of the Hindu Kush. Rising 20,000 feet high, almost to the roof of the world, Alexander chooses one of the toughest routes for his 30,000-strong army.
During the going over the Hindu Kush, inclement weather, whether it was freezing rain, snow, blizzards, would have made things very difficult to impossible for anybody but Alexander the Great. At elevation, the oxygen is thinner. It takes a lot more effort to go a lot shorter distance at that elevation.
The pass is so narrow in places, the army marches in a single file that stretches for 10 miles. Alexander's iron determination is the only thing that keeps the men on the move.
That if you're going to accomplish great things with an army as an instrument, that army has to be absolutely willing to do whatever you ask them to do. And if you consider, even for a moment, what it was that Alexander asked his army to do, it was ludicrous. Why would they do that? Well, it's because they had an extremely tight bond with him.
But over time, this bond is put to the test. In order to add fresh troops to his army, Alexander recruits Persian soldiers to fill the ranks. This proves very unpopular with the Greeks.
I must stress this isn't just a military decision, it's also a social matter. When the day's over, they dismount, they walk into the tent to have a drink, and what do they find? They find an Iranian barbarian to them propping up the bar and having a drink in the same tent with them. They don't like it. Soldiers can be very racist.
Their resentment grows worse as Alexander's character takes a dark turn. When the army reaches the fabled city of Samarkand, a lavish banquet is held. Alexander's erratic behavior is compounded by his bouts of heavy drinking, and alcohol seems to fuel his megalomania. One of the guests is Clytus, who served under Alexander's father Philip and saved Alexander's life in battle. As the wine flows, the mood turns ugly. Alexander begins boasting that his deeds are far more heroic than his father's. An angry Clytus listens in silence, then finally shouts out, "All your glory is due to your father." A drunk Alexander seizes a spear, kills his friend, and collapses in tears.
What upset Alexander, particularly by what Clytus said, was really two sorts of things. One, that Philip was much more important than Alexander was allowing to appear. In other words, Alexander's propaganda machine had gone into overdrive, and he, Alexander, had done it.
What Alexander wants now is all-consuming control over his men.